Picture the lights of the studio, bright enough to bleach the edges of reality, yet somehow unable to soften the tension that hung in the air. The audience, a living, breathing organism, seemed to sense that they were about to witness something that would echo far beyond these four walls. The cameras stood like silent sentinels, their glass eyes trained on two figures at center stage. On one side, Donald Trump, brash, confident, leaning into the persona he had cultivated over decades. On the other, Oprah Winfrey, poised, measured, her presence less about volume and more about gravity. You could feel the unspoken psychological duel before a word was even spoken. Trump's approach was familiar. Dominate the space, control the tempo, keep everyone reacting to him rather than thinking for themselves. It's a tactic rooted in what psychologists call asterisk agenda. Steer the conversation so thoroughly that your opponent is always one step behind, forced into defense rather than offense. Many had tried to match him in that arena and found themselves swallowed whole by the pace, the interruptions, the spectacle. But Oprah is not the kind of person who gets pulled into someone else's current. She understands something deeper about human interaction, that the most powerful communicator in the room is often the one who can listen longer than anyone else. And in that stillness, she waits for the perfect moment to move. As the questions began, the surface looked calm enough, but beneath it, there was a contest of wills. Trump was doing what he does best, flooding the space with words, asserting control over the narrative, throwing in provocations that dared his opponent to take the bait. Many interviewers would jump in here, trying to wrestle back control through interruption or fact checks, only to lose the thread entirely. Oprah did not. She leaned back ever so slightly, her expression unreadable, her eyes never leaving him. It was a subtle form of dominance, letting him exhaust his own rhythm until the weight of his words became their own burden. The audience picked up on it, even if they couldn't articulate it. The shifting in seats, the faint murmurs. It was the collective realization that something was different this time. This wasn't the usual rapid-fire exchange that left viewers with more noise than clarity. This was deliberate, intentional, a battle being fought on a plane that most debates never reach, and this is where the psychology becomes fascinating. People often mistake strength for volume, but real influence operates on a deeper wavelength. It's not about how loudly you can speak. It's about whether your words can land in the quiet part of someone's mind where belief lives. Oprah understood that to reach that space, you must create it first. By not matching Trump's energy, she denied him the emotional battlefield he thrives on. She was building a different arena altogether, one where a single sentence, well-timed and surgically precise, could do more damage than an hour of back and forth. The moment before it happened was almost imperceptible. Trump paused, not because he wanted to, but because even the most relentless speaker needs a breath. Oprah leaned forward, her posture shifting just enough to signal that the real conversation was about to begin. And in that second, the power dynamic flipped. This was no longer about who could talk the longest or dominate the headlines for the day. It became about something more enduring, truth delivered without theatrics, confidence without arrogance, and the kind of timing that turns a statement into a legacy. What followed would not just be heard, it would be remembered. Because in life, and especially in moments like these, the room doesn't belong to the one who speaks the most. It belongs to the one who says the thing that cannot be forgotten. It's tempting to think of verbal takedowns as loud, theatrical events. Verbal boxing matches where the winner is the one who can land the most blows in the least amount of time. But in reality, the most devastating strikes are often the quietest. They are not born from speed, but from precision. They are the result of patience, of listening, of waiting until the exact moment when a single, well-placed word or phrase can unravel an entire facade. That's what made Oprah's one sentence so effective. She didn't rush. She didn't spar for the sake of sparring. She allowed the conversation to run its course, to breathe. The psychological power in that cannot be overstated. It's rooted in the same principle martial artists use when they step back, letting an opponent commit to a strike before redirecting the energy against them. The waiting is not passive. It's an active gathering of data, reading of rhythms, sensing of patterns. And in that patient gathering, the right moment begins to reveal itself. When the opening finally appeared, it wasn't obvious to most in the room. Trump was mid-performance, doing what he does best, building his momentum through a mix of assertion, confidence, and sheer volume. But there's a paradox in performance. The longer you keep the spotlight on yourself, the more opportunities you give for someone else to expose the cracks. Oprah spotted one of those cracks, a small inconsistency, a subtle contradiction in his statement, and she moved in. Her tone didn't rise, her face didn't harden, she didn't lace the sentence with aggression or sarcasm. That's why it worked. Aggression invites defense, but calm invites reflection, and reflection, in a moment of public confrontation, is dangerous for someone who thrives on momentum. The sentence itself was like a scalpel, short, sharp, and cutting precisely where it needed to. She didn't bury her point under explanation or justification. She let the weight of the words do the work. In that instant, the verbal terrain shifted. Trump, usually quick to retort, didn't have a ready counterpunch. It wasn't that he couldn't speak, it was that the terrain had changed beneath him, and his tools didn't quite fit the new ground. Psychologically, what happened in that moment was the collapse of the narrative frame he had built for the conversation. He had been operating within his own carefully constructed space, where every question could be reframed, every criticism sidestepped. But a precise statement, especially one that reveals a truth already known but rarely said aloud, bypasses that frame entirely. It speaks directly to the audience's unspoken awareness. And here's the deeper philosophical truth. A single sentence can hold more power than 1,000 arguments when it speaks to something people already suspect, but have not yet articulated. Oprah's remark did not introduce a new idea. It illuminated one that was already sitting quietly in the minds of those watching. That's why it landed with such force. The audience reaction wasn't just about the cleverness of the line. It was about the recognition it sparked. Recognition is the most powerful form of persuasion because it doesn't feel like persuasion at all. It feels like confirmation of something we already knew. In that way, she wasn't trying to change anyone's mind. She was helping them see clearly what had been there all along. That's the genius of precision communication. It's not about dominating the space. It's about reshaping it so subtly that by the time the words land, the room belongs to you. And so that one sentence didn't just silence the moment. It claimed it. It became a turning point, a marker in the conversation where everyone watching understood, consciously or not, that the balance had shifted. Because in the end, the sharpest truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be said once. What made her words so devastating wasn't just their delivery. It was the undeniable truth behind them. Words on their own are just sounds in the air. But when those words align perfectly with reality, when they pierce the thin layer of pretense that people often live behind, they carry a force that cannot be ignored. That was the essence of Oprah's one sentence. It wasn't clever for the sake of cleverness, or sharp simply to wound. It was grounded in something far deeper. A truth so evident that once spoken aloud, it could not be unseen. Psychologists often talk about the concept of cognitive dissonance the mental discomfort we feel when we're confronted with information that conflicts with our beliefs, our image of ourselves, or the narrative we've come to accept. Trump is no stranger to navigating that terrain. In fact, he's often thrived in it by reframing or dismissing inconvenient truths before they can take root. But the brilliance of Oprah's sentence was that it didn't allow for reframing. It bypassed the intellectual defenses and went straight to that quiet place in the mind where a person knows, even if they won't admit it, that something is true. There's a reason why this kind of moment is rare. To land with that kind of weight, the statement must be both universally resonant and contextually specific. Too general, and it feels like platitude. Too personal, and it can be brushed off as bias. Oprah found the exact middle ground. Her words applied not just to Trump in that moment, but to a broader human tendency, one the audience recognized in politics, in business, even in their own lives. This is where the philosophical depth comes in. People often believe that power rests solely in control over the narrative, control over perception, control over how others respond. But the truth is, control is fragile. It survives only as long as the illusion holds. The moment someone names the truth that undercuts that illusion, the control evaporates. That's why the sentence landed so hard. It wasn't simply an argument, it was a mirror. And mirrors are dangerous to those who rely on projection to maintain authority. In that split second, you could almost feel the collective shift in the room. It was as if the sentence didn't just address Trump. It addressed everyone watching, everyone listening. It reminded them of a simple but uncomfortable reality. No amount of bluster, confidence, or charisma can stand forever against a truth that everyone recognizes. The irony is that Trump's entire approach is built on momentum. Keep the conversation moving fast enough, and you never have to stand still long enough for someone to look too closely. But Oprah made him stand still, if not physically, then psychologically. And when the moment of stillness came, the truth she offered filled the space like water rushing into a vacuum. From that point forward, the dynamic had shifted. Even if the conversation continued, even if Trump found a way to regain his verbal footing, there was no erasing that moment. The audience had seen the crack in the armor, and once people see the crack, they stop being blinded by the shine. That's why it landed so hard. Not just for him, but for everyone witnessing it. Because deep down, we all know there are moments in life when a single, honest statement can change the way we see someone forever. The lesson is as simple as it is difficult. When truth and timing align, the result is irreversible. The moment the words left her mouth, time seemed to hesitate. You could see it in Trump's face. A brief flicker, almost imperceptible, where the rehearsed confidence faltered. For a man whose public persona is built on unwavering certainty, even the smallest pause can feel seismic. His expression tightened, as though his mind was flipping through possible responses, but finding none that would restore the upper hand without making the moment even bigger than it already was. This is the part of human psychology that fascinates me. When someone is confronted with an unexpected truth, one that cannot be dodged, one that feels too clean to be countered, the brain goes through a rapid, silent recalibration. Fight, deflect, minimize, or reframe. These are the instinctive tools. But when all of them feel insufficient in the moment, even a split-second delay becomes visible, and in high-stakes, high-visibility settings, that pause is not just noticed, it's magnified. Trump has made a career out of projecting speed and dominance. His conversational style thrives on never letting an opponent's words linger long enough to take root. But Oprah's sentence wasn't something that could be bulldozed. It was compact, self-contained, and immune to the kind of rhetorical detours that often serve him so well. That's why his response, when it finally came, lacked its usual sharpness. It wasn't that he suddenly lost his ability to speak, it was that his words, no matter how forceful, could not erase what had just been said. Body language tells a story even when the mouth doesn't. His shoulders squared slightly more than before. his chin lifted in that familiar posture meant to convey authority. But the eyes, that's where the truth lived. They darted briefly, scanning the audience, almost as if searching for confirmation that the moment hadn't landed as hard as it seemed. But the room was too quiet. Not the silence of disinterest, but the silence of people processing something that just shifted their perception. And here's the thing. People rarely remember every detail of a debate or interview. What they remember are moments where the emotional and intellectual energy of the room pivots. Oprah's remark created one of those pivots, and Trump's reaction, hesitant, slightly off balance, cemented it. Philosophically, it speaks to a truth about influence. Control is not always lost in grand collapses. Sometimes it slips away in tiny fractures, in the brief hesitation where authority is questioned, and the question lingers longer than the answer. That's why his reaction mattered. Even if he continued speaking for the next half hour, that half-second of visible recalibration would be the part that lived on in memory. In the digital age, those moments are not just lived. They are replayed, slowed down, dissected. A raised eyebrow becomes a headline. A pause becomes a narrative. And in Trump's case, this was a narrative that challenged the very image he worked to maintain. Oprah didn't just win the exchange. She left behind a frame through which the rest of the conversation would be viewed. He tried to recover, of course, that's his nature, but the recovery felt like an afterthought. It was the difference between someone leading a conversation and someone trying to reclaim it. And once the audience senses that shift, it's almost impossible to reverse. That's the hidden cost of moments like this. They don't just change the dynamic in the room. They alter the story people tell themselves about who holds the power. And once that story changes, it rarely changes back. Because sometimes it's not the sentence itself that breaks through. It's the way the other person reacts to it. The air in the studio changed before the applause began. It was that split second of silence charged electric, where the audience collectively realized they had just witnessed something rare. Silence is often underestimated. We think of it as absence, but in moments like this, it's a presence, a fullness. It's the sound of people processing what they've just heard, deciding what it means, and feeling the weight of it settle in. And then the release. Laughter, applause, a ripple of knowing murmurs. Not the forced, polite response you sometimes hear when an audience is trying to support a speaker, but the organic reaction that happens when people feel they've been given permission to acknowledge the truth. That's the difference. Oprah's sentence didn't just land, it resonated. And resonance moves people in a way that mere entertainment never can. There's a psychological principle at work here called social proof. When we see others reacting strongly to something, it validates our own feelings and emboldens us to react as well. In that moment, the audience became more than observers. They became participants in the shift that had just taken place. Each clap, each nod, each laugh wasn't just a reaction to Oprah's words. It was a signal to everyone else in the room that they weren't alone in recognizing their truth. Trump, for all his media savvy, thrives on commanding that kind of crowd energy. But here, the energy wasn't his to control. It was flowing towards someone else. Someone who had just demonstrated that power doesn't have to be loud to be overwhelming. That's a subtle but devastating reversal, because once an audience's loyalty begins to pivot, regaining it is like trying to catch water with your hands. It slips away no matter how tightly you try to hold on. And in the age of instant communication, that shift doesn't stop at the studio walls. Phones were already out. Clips were already being captured. Social media was already beginning to pulse with the moment. People tweeting the sentence, posting the video, debating it in real time. The studio audience's reaction became the first wave, and the internet turned it into a tide. Within hours, The moment was everywhere, replayed by millions, analyzed by pundits, dissected in comment threads. The amplification was exponential, and with each replay, the power imbalance of that instant grew sharper in the public mind. From a philosophical standpoint, it's a reminder that truth is not just a private matter, it's communal. We often think of truth as something we carry silently inside us, but it takes on its fullest form when shared, when others hear it and recognize themselves in it. That's what happened in that room. Oprah didn't just speak a truth. She created a space where everyone felt safe acknowledging it. And here's where the deeper lesson emerges. Moments of collective recognition are dangerous to those who depend on division. They break down the walls between my side and your side because they tap into something more universal. Once that happens, it becomes harder to polarize, harder to distract, harder to control. The audience's reaction wasn't just an emotional release. It was a quiet declaration that they had seen something clearly, and they weren't going to unsee it. That is why the moment spread, not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniable. When a truth is spoken in such a way that an entire room rises to meet it, the echo will carry far beyond the walls that first contained it. And when it carries, it changes people. Some moments burn brightly in the news cycle and then fade, replaced by the next outrage or spectacle. But this was different. Oprah's single sentence didn't just make headlines, it left a mark. It became a reference point, a piece of cultural shorthand. People didn't have to explain the whole exchange anymore. They could just mention that moment, and others would nod, already picturing it in their minds. That's when you know an event has crossed from something that happened into something that belongs to the collective memory. It's not just the entertainment value that gives it longevity. It's the way it reframed perception. Once you've seen a public figure caught off guard by a truth they can't dodge, you never see them quite the same way again. The armor looks thinner, the confidence less absolute. That shift in perception is subtle, but it's powerful, and it doesn't need to be shouted from the rooftops. It lives quietly in the back of people's minds, influencing how they interpret every future word, every future gesture. Psychologists call this the asterisk availability heuristic asterisk, the tendency for the most vivid, emotionally charged moments to become the reference point for our judgments. For Trump, that meant that no matter how many rallies he held or how forcefully he spoke afterward, there would always be that mental clip playing for people who had seen it. For Oprah, it meant she had added another chapter to her reputation as someone who can, with calm precision, cut through the noise and reach the heart of a matter. And the influence didn't stop at the two of them. This was a lesson in the potency of timing, truth, and delivery for anyone paying attention. Leaders, activists, journalists, even everyday people saw a model for how to confront power without becoming consumed by it. The idea that you don't have to match someone's volume to match their impact began to take root. Culturally, the moment also revealed something about the hunger for authenticity. We live in an age of overexposure, where public figures are constantly performing, curating, spinning. The audience is savvy. They can sense when something is rehearsed or manufactured. What Oprah did cut through all that. It was real in a way that no amount of branding could replicate, and people recognized it instantly. That's why it lasted. That's why it spread. Philosophically, it reminds us that influence isn't about controlling every narrative, it's about leaving people with something they can't quite shake. A phrase, an image, a feeling that comes back to them at unexpected times. It might sit dormant for weeks or months, but when the right circumstance triggers it, the memory comes rushing back with its full original weight. That's the real legacy of this moment. It became a mental touchstone for how power can be punctured by precision. Even now, years from that broadcast, you can find the clip resurfacing online whenever a new political confrontation makes headlines. It's shared not just as entertainment, but as evidence. A proof of concept that even the most dominant voices can be humbled, not by force, but by a truth that's delivered at the perfect time. And maybe that's the quiet encouragement in all this. You don't need a platform as big as Oprah's to make a moment like that happen in your own life. You just need to know the truth, to recognize the moment when it matters most, and to have the courage to speak it clearly. Because in the end, words fade, applause dies down, and news cycles move on. But a truth that lands at the right time will live in the minds of those who hear it, for as long as they remember how it made them feel.